in the immaculate suburb of Emerald Rise, Nevada, where polished stone driveways and silent wealth define daily life. 72-year-old Ilara Vance stood waiting on the wide driveway of her son's home at 88 Laurel Way, lightly wiping dust from a luxury sedan with a handkerchief. A retired academic, she carried herself with calm dignity, dressed modestly, quietly celebrating her birthday alone while expecting her son. Precisely at 2 p.m., a patrol cruiser rolled in, carrying veteran Officer Ryan Clark and his younger partner, Officer Dean Holloway, whose resentment toward privilege simmered beneath an aggressive confidence. Holloway fixated on Ilara, mocking her as hired help despite Clark's caution, and exited the vehicle with his hand near his weapon. Startled, Ilara politely explained she was waiting for her son, but Holloway dismissed her words, demanded identification, and refused to let her retrieve it from inside. His tone hardened as he accused her of suspicious behavior, escalating his authority while Clark hesitated nearby. When Ilara, disappointed but composed, turned toward the house to call her son, Holloway reacted violently, shouting that she was fleeing. He grabbed her shoulder, yanked her backward, and slammed her onto the concrete. Her hip striking with brutal force, she screamed in pain, certain it was broken while Clark watched in shock. Holloway claimed she was resisting, drove his knee into her back, and cuffed her tightly as she sobbed, humiliated and injured. Clark reluctantly checked the house, finding no sign of crime, while Ilara begged that her son was coming. Moments later, a black government SUV screeched into the driveway, and Michael Vance emerged, tall, controlled, and radiating restrained fury, his badge and weapon briefly visible. His eyes locked onto his mother lying cuffed on the ground, and the whispered word "Mama" cut through the silence. Holloway tried to assert control, ordering Michael back, but Michael calmly demanded an explanation, counting down with lethal authority. When Holloway stammered and claimed resistance and burglary, Michael revealed his FBI badge, identifying himself as a special agent in charge and declaring the assault a federal matter. Holloway's confidence collapsed as Michael ordered an ambulance and identified the incident as police brutality. Ilara was freed, her wrists bleeding, her pain severe, and Michael's restrained hatred toward Holloway was unmistakable. He initiated a federal investigation on the spot, citing civil rights violations under federal law. While Holloway protested jurisdiction and authority, sirens approached, signaling the unraveling of his career. At the hospital, Ilara was diagnosed with a pelvic fracture requiring surgery, and Michael learned the local police were already closing ranks, claiming self-defense and conveniently corrupted body camera footage. Furious but calculating, Michael resolved to confront the system directly. At the precinct, Holloway was instructed by Captain Harrison to maintain a false narrative, but their confidence shattered when Michael entered with federal attorneys and a cybercrimes agent, presenting a warrant to seize all digital evidence. He revealed a deeper investigation into Holloway's past misconduct, unexplained cash seizures, and suspicious incidents, warning that every arrest and account would be audited. Michael demanded immediate access to the precinct servers, threatening obstruction charges if any data was altered. And as Captain Harrison's authority crumbled under federal scrutiny, the balance of power shifted decisively, leaving the outcome unresolved. But the reckoning unmistakably underway. Agent Lynn, a wizard in cyber forensics, restored the supposedly corrupted body cam footage in the precinct server room. They did a basic delete. Lynn said over the comms to Michael, who was in the temporary command center amateur hour, and Michael, "You're going to want to see this. It's worse than we thought." On the main screen, the recovered video flickered to life. They watched the assault, the sickening crunch, the cry of pain, then the part Holloway thought he had deleted while Clark was checking. The door. Holloway stood over the sobbing woman. He wasn't checking for weapons. His hand reached into Ilara's dress pocket, pulling out a small velvet pouch, her rosary beads. But then he shoved something else into her pocket, a small clear plastic baggie containing white powder paws. Michael roared. He planted it. He was setting up a cover. Michael turned to the lead prosecutor, Cynthia Lowe. "He was going to frame my mother for cocaine possession." "Is that enough for you, Cynthia?" Lowe closed her briefcase with a sharp snap. "That's Section 242, obstruction, fabrication of evidence. And possession with intent to distribute, that's 20 years minimum. I want Clark too." Michael said he saw the assault and did nothing. Clark was already in an interrogation room asking for a deal. Michael brought him in. Clark saw the pause, video the drug planting moment, and slumped into a chair. "He's my partner, you know how it works," Clark whispered. "Here is how it works today," Michael said. sliding a confession form across the table. You turn state's witness. You tell us everything Holloway has done for the last 3 years. Every planted baggie, every stolen dollar, every beaten suspect. You give us the captain too if he knew you'd do that. And maybe you keep your pension and do 5 years instead of 15. Clark picked up the pen. Holloway has a stash, he said quietly. In his locker at the gym, cash jewelry and more drugs. He targets the elderly and wealthy neighborhoods. He figures they're confused or they'll pay to make it go away. Yeah, Michael nodded slowly. Holloway wasn't just a brutal cop, he was a predator who used his badge to rob the vulnerable. Write it down. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Sacramento was packed. Ilara Vance, walking with a cane, took the stand. She looked directly at Holloway, who was now small and twitchy in a cheap suit. Mrs. Vance, prosecutor Lowe asked gently, "What went through your mind when the defendant planted the drugs on you?" "I thought about my life," Ilara said, her voice clear, "and I realized that this man wanted to turn me into a statistic. He wanted to destroy me to save himself." The defense lawyer, Mr. Steele, tried to paint her as aggressive, but Ilara shot him down. "To plant cocaine in a grandmother's pocket, is that a judgment call, sir, or is that a crime?" The final nail was the lost footage played on the large monitor. The frame-by-frame breakdown of Holloway, pulling the baggie from his vest and sliding it into Ilara's pocket. Then the surprise witness. Former Captain Thomas Harrison, in an orange jumpsuit who had cut a deal to save himself from a 20-year sentence. Holloway ran a ring, Harrison admitted to the shocked jury. He targeted seniors, he'd accuse them get rough, and then offer to let it go for a cash payment. If they fought back, he'd plant evidence. I looked the other way because his arrest numbers were high. He kicked back 15% of everything he stole to the precinct fund. Holloway put his head on the table. The blue wall had collapsed. The jury took less than an hour. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Guilty on all 8 counts, including deprivation of civil possession with intent to distribute. Defendant stand up, Judge Salinger announced Mr. Holloway. Salinger began, his voice low and unforgiving. "You are a predator." You looked at Mrs. Vance. "A woman who has contributed more to this community in a week than you have in your entire life. And you saw prey. You thought that because she was elderly and alone, she didn't matter. You were wrong. When a guardian turns into a wolf, the law must be the hunter." "Please, Your Honor," Holloway sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, I have a family." "Mrs. Vance has a family too," Salinger snapped. "And you tried to send her to prison for a crime you committed." The judge picked up a paper for the charges convicted. "Adhering to the federal sentencing guidelines and adding the enhancement for abuse of public trust, I sentence you to a total of 30 years. In the federal penitentiary system, no parole eligibility for 25 years. Take him away." Holloway collapsed as the marshals hauled him out. As he was dragged past Michael, he locked eyes with the agent. Michael didn't smile, he simply looked at Holloway with the cold, final indifference of a man watching trash being taken out. "It's done," Michael whispered. Ilara squeezed his hand. "Let's go home, son." 3 months later, the Virginia summer was in full swing. The backyard of 88 Laurel Way was a scene of laughter and barbecue. Smoke, it was Ilara's 73rd birthday. The cane was leaning against the porch railing. Ilara was sitting in a wicker chair holding court with her neighbors. Michael stood by the grill, having traded his suit for a plain t-shirt. He watched his mother. She looked peaceful, the lines of worry smoothing out. He brought her a plate of the burnt ends she liked. "Do you forgive him?" Michael asked quietly, sitting next to her. Ilara touched the gold cross around her neck. "The Bible tells us to forgive, and I pray for his soul," she said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I want him out. Forgiveness is for my heart, Michael. Justice, that's for his actions. I can forgive him and still be glad he's behind bars, where he can't hurt anyone else's grandmother." Michael smiled, a genuine, warm smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant silver bracelet. Engraved on the inside were the words, "Fear no evil. I wanted you to have a reminder," he said, clasping it around her wrist, "that you don't have to be afraid, because you've got the truth on your side, and the FBI." She chuckled, wiping a tear away. "And the FBI," he agreed, laughing. As Michael went to play with his nephews, on the lawn the sun dipped below the horizon. The arrogant face of Dean Holloway, the cold cell, the sickening thud, it all felt like a distant nightmare, fading into the twilight. The true victory was not the 30-year sentence, but the sound of laughter, the smell of barbecue, and the sight of an elderly woman sitting on her porch, safe and unafraid, watching her family live the life she had fought so hard to protect.